Right? Call not thou unclean what I have cleansed, is what God said in talking about the Gentiles.
Right.
And so the author is trying to convince these guys Jesus is the once for all time sacrifice. If you believe on him as the once for all time sacrifice for sin, then your conscience will be purged from sin. You'll no longer think that something needs to be offered to cleanse you from your sin. You'll see that you've been sanctified once, perfected once for all time, right?
Yeah.
And the way he used that example to prove to them that it couldn't work and that God found fault with that system was that you're left doing it every year,
Right.
which is the very evidence that it can't do what it was pointing to.
Right.
If it could cleanse you from your sin, you'd stop offering it. If the next new thing could satisfy our flesh, we'd stop buying the new thing.
Right.
If the things we do to keep up with the Joneses could actually satisfy us, we'd buy it once and then that would be it.
Right.
We'd just be satisfied. And that's why Paul comes and says in Colossians that that the only thing that can satisfy the flesh is for the flesh to see that it possesses eternal life and that flesh will be glorified immortal.
Amen.
For the only thing that can satisfy the flesh is for it to hear the promise of glorification, right? Because that's really what the flesh is after. It's just that it's in a world where the idea of glorification is not present. It's in a world that constantly speaks to it that says these things is what will satisfy you. The lust of the flesh, the pride of life, the lust of the eyes, right? You look at the things in the world, your flesh desires something, and then you think the things in the world are what will bring satisfaction to your flesh.
Right.
But the things in the world can never bring satisfaction to your flesh. That's why you're always needing a new thing that's in the world. And so what your flesh is actually longing for is to live and not die.
Right.
Paul says we desire earnestly for this mortal body to be clothed upon with immortality. That's the thing this flesh desires. It just doesn't know it, right? But the heart knows because eternity's been put in the hearts of all men.
Right.
So the only thing that can satisfy this flesh isn't the next new phone, the next new car, the next new clothes, the next new ski stuff. The only thing that can satisfy this flesh is the promise of its glorification. And not just the promise of its glorification, because we could sit around and think, well, how do we know that guy can do what he says? I mean, seriously, how many times people promise you something and you're busy wondering, are they going to follow through?
That's right.
Right? I mean, you got to be able to see that the one who promised is faithful and actually possesses the ability. So God, within the promise, is contained the revelation that he can do what he promised.
Yes.
How do we know? He took a guy who had a mortal body that needed to be clothed with immortality, that was dying in sin, and he took that guy's flesh and he glorified it immortal.
Amen.
And now